Well, you gave me a science lesson on it. You said that that's not a connection point that matters. It's the struts, because the wings push up like this against the fuselage and the holding pins keep it in place.
That's
You gave
exactly
me a whole
right.
lecture on it.
That's exactly right. The struts that go out from the bottom of the fuselage where the landing gear was, that's a main support element in those type of planes. And it goes out to the wings out there, and those struts are very strong. Mm-hmm. They're case-hardened steel struts. Anyway, we got it back out there and kept it at a tie down. I remember I used to, when I was going to fly by myself, I'd tie the tail down, leave the tail wheel tied down to the tie-down spot, and then I'd start it up, crack the throttle and start it myself, because I used to fly a lot by myself. And then I'd cut the throttle back to idle, and I'd go back and untie the tail and kick the shocks out front of the wheels and take off.
So you'd have to the plane would start moving when you jump into it?
No.
Oh.
No.
Just
It was idle. It's just a safety factor, you know. But it's, and no, Dwight and I eventually, he wanted to get a four-place plane, and he found this Cessna 172 out there that had been parked there forever and needed an engine overhaul. Mm-hmm. And by then, both of us were full radar controllers and making better money, and so the two of us bought that Cessna. It took him, 2 months to get it licensed again, but.
So y'all went in on that bigger plane?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Dwight Thomas and I
sold the Champion
for $4,800, $800 more than we paid for it, and they couldn't fly it worth a hoot. But I'm telling you, he nearly ground looped it when I was checking the guy out in it. He bought it. He nearly ground looped it. Dwight says, "I'm not going to check him out. You check him out." and I said, "All right." Luckily, I knew he might do it, and I had my foot right on the rudder pedal, and he let it go. He turned way out into the grass, and anyway, we made a couple of more good landings, and I said, "You got it, buddy. It's your plane." And then we already had the Cessna. Boy, it was $6,000, $6,200 or something dollars like that, which was a good price it was a clean-looking Cessna.
Was it also a high wing?
Yeah. It's a four-place, tricycle gear.
Yeah.
Penny. Anybody can fly a 172. They're so simple. And we already had it picked out there. If the guy said okay, he was asking $7,000 something, and Dwight and I figured we could come up with $6,200. We got the $4,800, and we each threw in $500 or $600. I forgot. It doesn't matter. And we bought the Cessna 172. And then I said, "Dwight, I'll help you pay for the overhaul, but I can't help you do anything on it. Don't worry." Dwight loved to do stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So he got Bob Gilbert, was the A&P mechanic. And that was real funny. Bob Gilbert was an old friend. He's the one that designed and built a miniature Spitfire. Home built. You remember that?
Yeah, I remember those kits.
I'm just reiterating on where Bob Gilbert came from. Yeah, Volkswagen engine in it, and put in a dual ignition. Had a system. Then he built. Let's see what the last one was. He built. No, the first one was a Night Twister. I'm sorry, that's the one that crashed. They sold it to a instructor pilot at Moody Air Force Base, and he got killed flying it from here to Moody. It was a Night Twister, a double wing. Then he built the Spitfire. He kind of designed it himself. He went to Mayme, where a man had a real Spitfire, and he also had a degree. Bob Gilbert had a degree from the in aeronautical engineering, so he knew weight,
Yeah.
balance, design, and all that. And he designed his own little miniature Spitfire, 1/2 size, put a Volkswagen engine in it. And, but anyway, Bob somehow got my address, email address, and emailed me, and we communicated. He lives in Asheville now, and anyway. But Bob Gilbert took the engine and completely overhauled the Cessna engine for us, and didn't charge hardly anything because we were going to let him use the Cessna too.
Yeah.
So if he's going to use it himself, he's going to do a good job.
Yeah, that's
And
good.
being an A&P licensed, he could certify it too. So he overhauled it, certified it, and we had a 0-time engine on that Cessna. But I didn't enjoy flying it very much.
How long did you stay in with the Cessna?
I practically gave Dwight my half of it. We had other interests. I can't remember.
How long had you been married to Kathy when you got that plane? How?
The 172. I can't remember.
We were still at the house in Rolling Hills, huh?
Either that or that may be why I got out of the 172 to work it out to get this house,
Yeah.
I can't remember. That's just not clear in my mind, but I didn't stay with it long. I think the only trip I ever took in it was Kathy and I and Charlie and Mark. We flew over to Havana, and I landed at that little airport right outside of Havana, and had lunch with Elizabeth and flew back. And Kathy and I we went up to Jekyll Island one time, but I wasn't having any fun with it. It wasn't any fun. I used to love to spin the Champion and do lazy eights and stuff like that, chandelles, and did that mostly myself. But anyway, they sold it to Dwight, gave it to him, and then Dwight died soon after that. So
Yeah, had lung cancer from secondhand smoke from the working in the center, huh?
that's what they thought. That's what he thought.
Because he
He
didn't
never
smoke
smoked.
himself.
He never smoked.
It had to be it. That place was like a
Smoke
couldn't-
mill.
You couldn't see the wall on the other side of the place when you went in that big control room.
was
So
awful.
it was smoke.
It was awful. It was terrible. But that was the plane thing, But I would be interested to see. I'm not going to do it, but I'd be interested to see how much of a flying I retained. I think it would be completely
You
natural.
Just pick it right up. Like
When I sit here and think, how did I do a slow roll? But I can put my feet down in my hand and I can go through it without thinking. Shit, I called him 2 damn weeks ago. Charlie needed
just
some
now getting
cypress.
back to you.
And he's just now getting back. And I said, I didn't need any damn wood for a sign. I was calling for Charlie. Charlie needed some for a job down in St. Augustine. And I bet he's already had to do it because that guy he didn't call me back. It's a hell of a way to run up. He owns Florida Cypress.
Yeah.
And
I've been there.
I bought a lot of wood from him when I did a lot of signs. And are we on now?
Florida Cypress, where's that?
That's on, I don't know, it's out by Evergreen Cemetery on the back.
Videotaped his building 3 weeks ago.
You what?
I videotaped his building 3 weeks ago.
What for?
Is that just a big coincidence?
The pre-con, I did his property.
Oh. Huh.
Yeah, it's Bill Cavanaugh. It's his name. He's the owner, and he used to live right down here in Water Oak. He moved somewhere, I don't know where. And he's done a lot of favors for me. Of course, I've referred a lot of people to him too. But anyway, where were we now?
Stunkard fan trips.
Yeah,
During Rolling Hills.
yeah, in Rolling Hills. Yeah.
I remember them coming down, and he liked to play poker with his green hat.
Yeah, he was. Well, I probably wouldn't want to talk about that.
Don't worry about anything like that.
I remember one trip, a fam trip I took out. Did we talk about that in the other one?
No.
One fam trip I took out to see Bob, and Eleanor was his wife's name, and Sheila and Valerie were his two daughters. They've long since married, got children, and moved to Denver and to Des Moines, Iowa. Stunker's family, two girls have, and of course he got a divorce from Eleanor. Stunkard was he loved to gamble, and he was good at it. He was probably a genius as far as memory goes. And I always was envious of him. He was so daggone smart, and cadets in the classroom, and I was struggling like hell all the time. And I could outfly him any day of the week, but I could not outdo anybody, hardly in the books. But at any rate, Stunker and I were good friends since he went to the 461st Bomb Wing with me, one of only 3 lieutenants that went, second lieutenants. And so we got to be good friends. We got out the same day of the Air Force. He went to airlines, I didn't. We both took an airline test and passed it in St. Louis, but I decided I didn't want any part of it at that time. They were furloughing them so bad. Anyway, he went with the airlines, I didn't. But at the time, he was chief pilot of Continental Airlines. Big job. He had worked his way up, and he flew around the private plane of the owner. Stick's wife was what was the wife who was the Jackie Gleason lady that who played with Jackie Gleason as his wife? Audrey Meadows.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Right.
Bob flew Meadows around in their personal jet. She was married to Sticks, the owner of Continental Airlines at the time.
Huh.
He was a chief pilot, and Sticks wanted the best, supposedly the best. Bob was a good pilot. I was every bit as good as he was. I just wasn't as smart as he was, or intelligent, we'll say, as he was. But we were good friends. And anyway, I went out to see him. As you know, he and Eleanor came to us. You all don't remember it too much, as far back as Harborview.
Yeah.
They were having trouble. He and Eleanor were having marital troubles. And they asked if they could come and spend a few days with us. They wanted to see if we could kind of bring them together. That's when he took me out on that damn deep sea fishing trip that I got so sick I was ready to die. He loved to deep sea fish, so he says, "I'll pay for everything. I'll take you out. We'll go catching." So he took me. We went 20 miles out, and boat went like this and like that. And when it started doing like that, boy, I threw up for 4 hours. Tried to. But anyway, he brought Eleanor at that time to Harborview. Y'all don't remember that, do you?
I don't remember the trip. I remember them visiting.
No, I'm going to get to
Rolling
that.
Hills.
But
Yeah.
anyway, they came that early, and they were beginning, I think, to have trouble then. But we had a good time together, and Shirley was the one that introduced Bob, his Eleanor, to Bob.
Oh, I didn't know that. I thought she was like a stewardess or something.
No, sir.
Yeah.
She was a dental hygienist in Blytheville, Arkansas. And Bob was looking for dates. Bob would fly over. Bob was flying the paychecks back and forth then, but that's just when Shirley and I was one of only 3 officers, and he'd fly our paychecks in from Hill Air Force Base and a jet, and then he'd fly back, and he'd come over and spend a day or two and want to get a date, and so Shirley fixed him up with her dental hygienist.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it wasn't her hygienist because she got her dental work done at the base, but anyway, she had to have some specialty work done, and the hygienist that worked on her. Anyway, she said, "Are you interested in and me having a date with a lieutenant friend of ours, and she said, "Well, I don't like blind dates, but since you're a patient and your husband's an officer," she said, "Yeah, I'll go on it." And that's how they met, and he eventually married her in Blytheville. So that's the story about Bob and I and his wife. But I went out later on, flew out to Los Angeles to spend 3 days with him on a fam trip. And, I got to fly in the cockpit. And it was fun trips for me. It gave me away from controlling. And I loved to fly in the cockpit of those big planes. It was usually a 1011 or a 727. Had a nice seats in both of them, especially the 1011. Had a great big old seat with armrests on it and footrests. You just sat right up above the captain, looked right down on everything, and had a great big window beside the seat on a 1011. There's a 1011 that I went out this time on, and we got there, and I could sense they were having trouble. But that's when Bob had his own Twin Beach aircraft, and he said, let's go to Las Vegas and gamble a little bit. And I said, "Well, that's fine with me." And he said, "Well, that's great." And that's when he took me on an air trip around Los Angeles down to San Diego to see the SeaWorld, and took me out to Catalina Island, flew around that, and then we took off VFR to Las Vegas. And Twin Beach is a nice airplane. It was a BE-38, a BE-58, Baron, Beach Baron, nice airplane. Had an airline cabin in the back, and it was a nice airplane that he had bought. And anyway, we got about halfway out there, and we hit an ice storm. And thank God he had boots. You know what boots are?
Yeah, they're on the
They're
leading
rubber,
edge,
and they expand and break the ice off of the wings and the tail. And he says, "Carl, we got to go IFR right now." He says, "You take the airplane." Well, I hadn't flown an airplane at that time, especially a twin engine, and since the Air Force. And so I took it over and flew it, and it was so much fun. And he says, "You want to see if you can fly at IFR into Vegas?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd like to try it." And I still had my instrument rating, so I was legal, but and I flew it. And Vegas, they have a lot of traffic, so they were able to give us a vector in, and we didn't have to make an approach, an IFR approach. They just vectored us in and set us up, and I descended right down into the flight pattern, broke out. I was real proud of myself because I hadn't flown instruments in so long. And so we went in, and we went to his special casino. It's a Hilton, one of the biggest Hiltons anywhere, I guess. And I knew right off the bat when we got in there, we had to have lunch. And this waitress came up to him, and she had and she came up and rubbed right into his head. And boy, old Bob has been around. He'd been fooling around a lot.
Yeah.
And this is before they broke up. He and Ellen had broke up. And that's when I've told you the story about him. Going out to the airport and going back a little bit to the Los Angeles airport, when we were going out, he says, I need to stop by and get some gambling money from my gambling account. And it's one Eleanor obviously didn't know about. And I thought, he's going to get a few $100s. He got $15,000 out of his gambling account. Well, when we got out there, and we finished eating, and we went to this one area where the blackjack tables were. And he says, sometimes it takes me a while to find the right table. And he showed me the big wheel gamblers, and I'd never seen anything like it. You're not allowed to get there in sunken down place, and they used $1,000 chips. And this one man had, reason it impressed me, I was always such a chinny. This one man had 3 rows of chips like that. You know how thin they were, $1,000 chips. There's probably $200,000 worth of chips under there. And he was taking 5 at a time and putting them out there on the roulette table, 5 at a time.
That's just total luck, too.
And
I mean, there's no
then
skill.
finally Bob said, okay, this table looks good. And he went over there, and I will swear to you, in no more than 7 or 8 minutes, he had won $7,000 in 7 or 8 minutes, and they changed the dealer. As soon as they changed the dealer, he pulled his winnings out and left. He was really a good gambler. He knew how to, and he loved it. I've never seen anybody. And he gave me $1,000 worth of chip, or what? Yeah, it was chips. He gave me $1,000 in chips. He says that'll pay for our trip out here and the gas and tie down and everything. Just keep that, and I'll play on their money the rest. He went home with $5,000 profit. Profit. Yeah, he played one more time and took a little bit and lost a little bit. He says, "Well, that's it." And, but it was really strange. He knew that waitress that met him at the table and knew her by first name, and anyway, we flew back late that afternoon. Eleanor was having dinner for us, and he had a swimming pool that overlooked Long Beach. You could see the Queen Mary, the old Queen Mary that was docked there for show, and you could get over on the edge of his pool. He was up so high on Palos Verdes, and you could see it was a beautiful, had lights under the pool. It was a nice pool, wasn't one of the rinky-dinks jobs, and heated, of course. And I knew right then that Bob's marriage was in trouble. And then
How could it not be? He's got a separate gambling account. He's flying places. He's probably had flings with stewardesses and all kinds of stuff, you know.
No, just one. And he lived with her for, matter of fact, he lived with her when she died.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And, but anyway, Eleanor was concerned then. And then that's when they came out to Rolling Hills and stayed with us. You may not remember that, but
No, I remember that.
they came and stayed with us, and she talked to Shirley about it, and to me too, that they were having troubles and they hoped it could work out, you know, and she wanted some normalcy, and they stayed there for a week, I believe, with us then, and we went out together at a dinner theater, something. Of course, Sheila and Valerie were about y'all's ages, weren't they? As I recall.
I remember Stunker going out in the backyard, and he had these thongs that he was wearing, and he kicked a football incredibly high up in the air, barefooted, wearing these thongs. It's just a disjointed memory I have of it. Yeah, just a disjointed memory.
Bob was such a homely looking person, but then on
quiet too.
What?
Very quiet too.
Yeah, he was quiet. Yeah. He was so smart.
Mm-hmm.
He was so intelligent. He never had a day of college, but he had an IQ, had to have been out the top. Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't doubt it.
I was never jealous, other than it just to piss me off to see how easy he could take the tests in the Air Force, and I was struggling like heck on everything because I was just like you, or both of you, is dyslexic as all hell and couldn't read. But anyway, after that they broke up, and then Kathy and I, let's see now. Well, the strike, where was this during the airstrike? Where
I
were you
think-
all here?
I think we were here when that strike happened.
That was 80. That was 80, 81.
Yeah, that was just when I left.
Where
to
were
go to
you all? Were you all
Slumber
still here? I can't remember. I think you were.
I was, yes, I was still living here. I think you had moved Mark out, and Phil was in Louisiana. So I was the only one here.
No, we didn't move Mark out before you.
Oh, yes, way before me. Y'all moved Mark out.
To
shortly
go to
after we
college or what?
moved.
He
No,
was-
to get him his own apartment.
He was having an incredibly bad time. You know, he and Kathy were getting into it and all this stuff, and so he got a little apartment right by JU over there.
Yeah, I remember that. That was the awfulest looking place I ever went in. But okay. Then I got the first fam trip after the strike. Seniority and availability and everything, and I got the first fam trip out of. This is kind of another stunker story, but out of Jacksonville, and that's when I said, well, told Kathy, I said, let's go to San Francisco. And neither one, I had been there once before on a fam trip with Harry Ferguson, and was great. It was, I knew we could have a great time out there. So we took I arranged a fam trip with Delta and got Kathy a ticket in the coach, cheapest seat in the house. And we got on the plane, and this is the first fam trip that the airline had seen. And they said, boy, they were so grateful to the controllers because we kept their jobs alive. The controllers that stayed on after the strike, we kept their jobs alive. We kept all the planes flying. They never had to cut back their schedule. They were very grateful and very
Well, you were
gracious.
working your ass off too.
We were. I was
Double
working
shifts
6
and all
hour.
that.
I was working 6 days a week, and 2 of those days were 10-hour days, and I was spending an hour each way to work. Ricky will remember. All I did is go back and forth to work. But they were very grateful, and they showed it. They were so. When I got in the cockpit here in Jacksonville, boy, it was that was I guess that was a 727, and it doesn't matter. It was a 1011 out of Atlanta. We got on the plane and says, "Where are you going, boy? This is the first person we've seen on a fam trip." I said, "Well, I'm the first one in Jack Center." I said, the administrator said we all had to start taking some time off. We were all getting tired. And so they said, "Well, you going out there by yourself?" I said, "No, my wife's back here. We're going out here for a week of vacation." And they said, "Your wife's back there." I said, "Where is she? Is she in first class?" And I said, "No, sir. She seat I could afford." And they said, well, he called the head stewardess up and says, "Go back there and get this man's wife out of her seat and put her in first class and give her all she wants to drink and eat." So Kathy didn't know what was going on. You know, they moved her. Says, "So we're moving you up to first class," and they put her in a double seat with big seats and by herself. It was a vacant seat. And anyway, Kathy was thrilled. She didn't realize what was happening. Then we got in Atlanta. That captain, I mean, all they could talk about was how much they appreciated us. You know, Delta at that time didn't have unions. They were non-union airline. So I was non-union, and boy, we really, I guess, hit it off better. But we got to Atlanta, and unbeknownst to me, I had to change planes and change crews. Well, I got to the next one. Oh, well, come on up. Took Kathy straight to first class in Atlanta and put her in another double seat by herself. And and I got up in the cockpit, and it says, would you like to go back and sit in first class with your wife? And I said, no, I really like to fly in the cockpit. I'm a pilot and everything. Boy, we got along beautifully. I mean, it was one of the most fabulous trips you could ever, because at 10 or 11, you sit in this big, beautiful armchair up above the captain, and you can everything you do. And it was just a wonderful trip out there. And then when we got there, the captain says, where are y'all? Do y'all have a place to stay? And I said, yeah, we're staying at I think it's called the Huntley House. It was a little place we could afford. It's $55 a night or something. Back then, that was still a good price in San Francisco, right downtown. But it was advertised as being all totally renovated and everything. Huntley House, I said, well, I don't know where that is, but say it's downtown? I said, yes, sir. I said, well, we got transportation arranged for you. And so we got down. I forgot how Kathy got to the. Anyway, they tied us up, and they had a limousine waiting for us. Hello. Hey. Come on home. Sorta. Come on home and you can verify what I say as being truth or non-truth. I'm telling them about the San Francisco trip where Delta did so much for us. Yeah. Okay. Spend some money? Okay. All right. I don't know. How far along are we all?
Almost finished.
There you go.
Remind Kathy that we're taking Ibby to the golf course.
Oh, yeah. Phil said to remind you that we're taking Ibby to the golf course this afternoon. Okay. All right, bye. Anyway, Delta had a Delta limousine waiting for Kathy and I. They had a nice Delta bag that they gave us, and in the bag they had a bottle of real fine champagne, which we neither one drank, and took us to our hotel room. And they didn't pick us up though. We had to take the regular airport limousine but they treated us extremely good. They were so grateful that their planes were flying, and of course we did the normal. We left at 7:30 in the morning. We got to San Francisco at 11:30 their time. We were in our hotel by 12:15 Pacific time. We were only a half a block from the center of town. You've been there?
San Francisco,
yeah. That big park right in the middle of town.
Yeah, Union Square.
We were only a half a block from there, where all the queers are. And so we walked down there and we saw a bus. It was going to Muirwood, Redwood Forest. So we said, let's do it. So that day alone, we came from Jacksonville to San Francisco. We went 90 miles out to the Muirwood Redwood Forest, spent 3 hours there, came back, all in one day, the first day. We were young and vivacious then. I guess we could do that. But anyway, I was in contact with Bob Stunkard, and then he was dating seriously, living with the head stewardess of Continental Airlines. And he was the chief pilot at the time. So it was and he said, Bob called and said, well, tell you what, we're going to fam up one night. What's convenient with y'all? And we had, I don't know what night. It doesn't make any difference. They fammed up there early in the afternoon, the two of them, and she, contrary to what you think, she was very good looking.
I would
And-
imagine.
Well, he was so homely looking and
Yeah,
whatever.
but she's a chief stewardess. Back then, they didn't hire ugly women to be stewardess.
And
Now they do, but
him,
back then they
well,
did.
Bob, he was with her till death. I mean, but anyway, we had a great time. We went up and had drinks on top of the Mart. Hopkins, that's the key spot in San Francisco. And then we went to the Blue Fox, one of the most exclusive restaurants in San Francisco for dinner. It was really a nice time with Bob and Eleanor. It wasn't her name was I can't think now. She was from Texas. Oh dang, I can't remember. And the tragic end of that story was he came home one day and she had a massive heart attack and died. And
How
he
many
found her-
years later?
Many years
Many
later,
years.
they were together forever. I mean,
Yeah.
they were real serious. Apparently, they had a great life.
Yeah.
Eleanor moved, his wife, moved to Denver, where
Where their kids is.
Sheila Sheila was there. Sheila at that time worked as foreign airlines. She, by the way, had a commercial pilot's license too,
Huh.
but she didn't fly commercially. She got into the booking end of the airline business.
Administrative side, yeah.
And Valerie, they both married and they both had children.
Well, you went up to San Francisco on an earlier fam trip with our mom some time ago because you brought me back some souvenir chopsticks.
No,
No, Mom didn't go.
no,
We
she
went-
didn't go. I went with Harry Ferguson, took one flight and I took the other.
Oh,
And that's why I really wanted to go back.
yeah.
Harry and I we were only allowed to stay 2 nights on fam trips at that time. But after
Yeah.
the strike, they let us stay however long, a whole week,
Yeah,
So
yeah, that's
we
good.
stayed a whole week in San Francisco.
I remember before you left, you said that you were going to go with your friend. I didn't remember his name, and y'all were going to get $100 meal somewhere. And then you did. You went to a restaurant where you spent $100 on a meal, and you brought me back the leaf of a sequoia tree and some chopsticks, which I still have. And I used science teacher in our school told me how to keep that leaf alive, and I kept that leaf alive for 6 months.
No, on the trip that Kathy and I took, I brought back a redwood tree.
Well,
It's a little, it was
Yeah.
about like this. And they put it in a little thing and I brought back a redwood tree. It didn't make it, obviously. Did you know that redwoods and cypress are first cousins?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, I probably told you that as a point of interest to me. The tour man out there at the Muirwood Redwood Forest brought that up. But
If you sort of look at their leaves and the way they're shaped and so forth, I mean, a redwood sort of looks
Redwood
like
and
just
cypress
a real
look
large
identical.
cypress. The only thing is, a cypress funnels up a little bit more like that. The redwood doesn't funnel up as much. It
well,
kinda
it's
goes
just
a little-
because it's so much
It's
bigger. I think
bigger,
it
yeah.
just goes so much higher.
Yeah,
But
Tell us about the story where the people got sick on the plane and they asked you to sit second seat or something like that. Or?
no, it was a man. He died. I was going to on another trip to Los Angeles. I went several times to see Bob and Eleanor. That was one of my good spots to go because it was a long way off and I could be on the plane a good while. And it was a fun trip because Bob always took us somewhere else,
Yeah.
Anyway,
Bob knew how
gosh,
to party.
we left,
Or knows how to party.
let me see now, we left Atlanta and this elderly man got on the plane, elderly. He was only 79 years old.
Oh, it's all relative.
He looked elderly at the time, but he really looked older than I feel like. But anyway, he had gotten on. I didn't know it, but he got on the plane, and we just got into altitude out of Atlanta, heading to Los Angeles. And let me see. This was in This was in a Boeing 720, a 4-engine jet. It was back that far. And so we got out, let me see, we were about crossing the Mississippi River. And the stewardess came up front and said, there's a man that's really sick back here. And he said, give him 100% oxygen. And he dropped the oxygen. She knew how to drop the oxygen mask for that seat. Gave him 100% oxygen. And she said, he's not responding. And the captain said, well, let me see if he announced over the speaker system, was there a doctor on board the plane? Look at him. And by that time, his eyes dilated. He's dead. He died. And about this time, we were getting a beam Dallas, but not close to it, but a beam to Dallas. And the captain asked the doctor to come forward, said, will you certify that he is dead, that there's no emergency for landing? And the doctor said, yeah, his eyes are dilated. He's gone.
Pupils
Nothing we
fixed
can
and
do.
dilated.
And so the company, he called the company and said, what do we do? Do we land in Dallas or do we go on to Los Angeles? And the company said, well, you've already gotten the doctor to certify, said he'll certify he's dead. Says, see if there's anybody on board that's going to be bothered by him being on board, or would they like for us to land in Dallas and take him off? And everybody on board said, go on to Los Angeles. So we went on to Los Angeles, but they wanted to move him. He was over the wing, and they wanted to move him to a back seat. And they had plenty of seats.
Yeah.
And so they cleared the back seats off. Well, the stewardess couldn't handle him. And so the steward got kind of sick at his stomach because the guy was dead. So
there could be certain exudations of bodily fluids and things like that.
He was so limber, it was hard to carry down the aisle of the plane. Mm-hmm. So the co-pilot says, how are you? You think you can handle him? He told me. I said, yeah, I think so. I've never carried a dead man, but I'll give it a try. And so the co-pilot and I had to go back and take him under the arms and drag him back to the back seats. And they took the armrest out of the back thing and just laid him down there and covered him up. And the stewardess kind of put a seatbelt on him. That's the way he went into Los Angeles. We had to pull to a special ramp, though, and nobody... wait a minute. Yeah, no, they got everybody off. And I stayed on with they said they may want you as a witness, so I stayed on until they got off, and Bob was meeting me there, and they said, boy, we were getting worried whether you were ever going to come off that plane. Anyway, I think that's what you were talking about, Rick.
Well, I just remember you saying some pilot said that he was 37,000 feet closer to heaven or something
No, oh, that's right. The stewardess came, I forgot to add that in there. The stewardess came forward and said, the doctor said he's dead, and started crying. And the co-pilot said back to her, said, well, look at it this way. He's 37,000 feet closer to heaven, honey. Something like that. And she started crying harder. But it wasn't funny, but it was funny. The co-pilot was very nonchalant about the whole thing. He was better than I was. I couldn't get a good grip on him like he could. But we put him on the back seat, and they didn't need me as a witness. And
I just remember you were talking about a story coming out of, I think it was Dallas on a fan trip. You were coming back from somewhere, and and they weren't far into the trip or something, and the co-pilot or somebody had gotten sick, and they didn't want to call off the trip, and they looked to you and said, you know, what's your ratings, and can you? And you said, well, yeah. So you flew. It was a Douglas DC-8 Super Charlie.
No, the story is.
Well, whatever.
There's nobody sick. The first fam trip I ever took was out of Jacksonville International, and it was a Boeing 720. They were brand new. Later on, they looked at them as rocket sleds. They took every bit of the runway just about. They didn't climb too good.
727?
No, Boeing 720.
720. Oh, okay.
It was kind of like a DC-8 or a Boeing 707. It was a smaller version of the Boeing 707. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And the 720, and this was my first trip on a jet, on a commercial jet, fam trip. And I was just going to Tampa, and I went in. It was with National Airlines, and National was always loose as a goose, and man, friendly and nice. All the pilots were nice guys, and it wasn't nearly as formal as they later on got to be. But I went in and met the crew, and they said, "Oh, hey, Jim, where are you going? Just to Tampa? Is all you're going?" I said, "Yeah, I'm just going down to see my sister." And so I got in the cockpit with them there and said, what did you know? I told them I was a pilot and I really loved to. No, they said I could fly in the back. They said there's only 12 passengers back there. It's a Saturday night. Said, would you like to fly in the back in the seat? I said, no, I want to fly up here with y'all. I says, I was a military pilot. I love to fly. And then he said, well, did you ever fly jets? I said, oh, yeah, I was an instructor in jets. And we really were hitting it off. And boy, we rotated in that 720, man, and the captain gets out of his seat. I mean, we were just off of the ground. The wheels are just in the well, and he's getting out of the seat. He said, get up there and take us to Tampa. I was flabbergasted because they told us, don't ever get at the controls of an airliner. I said, no, I'm not supposed to. He said, get up here. I know you want to fly it. And I did. I got into the captain's seat, and by that time we were passing 10 or 15,000 feet. And he says, level off at 20,000. We're going to stay at 20 all the way to Tampa. It's not a long trip. And he says, can you get us there? And I said, yeah, I can get us there. And so I got on the radio and I got to the center, and they said, is this CP? The center, everybody recognized my voice. He says, is this CP? And I says, affirmative. He says, what's the heading for Tampa? And so they came in a vector heading direct Tampa, and the pilot was sitting back in the jump seat. He laughed. He said, "Man, you do know how to get there, don't you?" Or something like that. And so I just handled the controls. They never put it in autopilot. They let me maintain the altitude and set the trim and everything. Not much. You didn't. And as soon as I started letting down, he says, I guess I'll have to take it back.
Yeah. Or you don't want to land it, do you?
No, he didn't even ask me that.
Yeah.
That was never an option.
Shoot, it's like...
But I had some great experiences on fam trips. I had one, I was going up to see Fred one time. And Eastern Airlines had a captain that was notoriously rotten. I mean, he was the most aggravating human being you ever want to work. And he was one of the top senior captains in the airline. Mm-hmm. And he didn't like anybody, much less controllers. And his name was Cox. And boy, his name was known all over the en route system as being a real ass and trouble to get along with. He would question anything you did that was out of the ordinary. If you gave him a vector to clear traffic, he says, what's my traffic? Where is it? We always told him anyway, but says, why are you having to move me? Stuff like that. He was really an ass. And I was going on Eastern Airlines, and I got to Atlanta to change planes for Raleigh, and damn if I didn't get on a plane with him. And I got up there and introduced myself, and when he said Cox, I says, oh, I was just almost shaking. I was so daggone afraid, really. He says, well, I don't want you in my cockpit. You can go back here and sit in one of the seats that's vacant. And I said, well, I'm a former Air Force pilot, and I really like to fly in the cockpit and see how things are up here. And he kind of says, all right, okay, you can fly up here. And I'm saying, boy, I better not say a word, you know. And lo and behold, about halfway from Atlanta, it's a short trip, to Raleigh, he said, what'd you fly in the Air Force? Naturally, I said T-33 jets.
Yeah.
So, you know, but then I brought it up that I flew the B-26. He says, the Douglas B-26? I said, yeah, I flew that. I didn't fly it in combat, but I was combat ready in it. And anyway, that broke the ice.
Well, of course, he was an Air Force pilot too.
Well, I don't remember him being an Air Force pilot, but he knew about the Douglas B-26 and how hard it was to fly. And it's how great an airplane it was, you know. But we hit it off pretty good, and lo and behold, I spent that afternoon and night with Fred and went back the next day, and they had RON there, and he was taking me back. He was flying. He was the captain going back on the plane to Atlanta. And he said, come on, you can come up in the cockpit if you want to. But I got along with him all right. I was really surprised when I told everybody when I got back to the center that I flew with Cox. They couldn't believe it.
Did you ever talk to him when you were as an air traffic controller? Did you ever have to talk to him?
Gave me hell.
Yeah.
I had talked, not after that. I don't remember ever work, but before that, I'd had to work him, and boy, the word would pass. It says Cox is flying this one, boys, when they'd hand him off, you know, and you would do everything you could to stay right.
And so you never got to talk with him after the flight.
I don't recall it, no. But later on, he got into trouble. He gave somebody too much trouble, and boy, they wrote him up, and he got written up, and he kind of straightened out and finally retired. He was the senior captain. He was about to go. And
Tell us some interesting stories at the center, air traffic. I know you one time saved a guy that got lost in the Gulf. Any interesting stories of things that happened?
yeah, well, I got to know a lot of the commercial pilots that flew the planes out of various places in my area. I worked a lot of times. I worked from just west of Jacksonville all the way over to the Jacksonville center boundary at Mobile, Alabama. And there's a lot of companies that owned airplanes that flew out of various airports around. One of the main ones I got to know was Thompson Industries, big automobile parts, and they also sponsored race cars. You've heard of the Thompson racers probably in Indianapolis, but they had a King Air. It was a twin-engine turboprop plane, and he flew out of Thomasville. That was that was the main plant for Thompson Industries. They had another plant in Indianapolis.
Thomasville, Georgia?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they had another big plant in Indianapolis. Oh, I forget. They were always flying up there, but this guy just flew all the time. And I was telling the story, and I can't even remember the pilot's name now. But I worked him a lot on 4 to midnight. He'd be coming back in off of a business trip, flying the King Air. It was a Twin Beach, and back in the earlier days, but they got this King Air, a nice plane, King Air, and he'd come in sometimes after flying, putting 10 and 12 hours on the air, flying in the air, which is extremely exhausting to a pilot. And and we got to know each other well, because one night he came in and he says, "What's your operating initials?" Mm-hmm. And I said, "S.A." And he said, "Okay." I suspected he was going to get on the ground and call the center and ask who S.A. was. And he did. He got on the ground and called the watch supervisor, told him, he didn't want to write him up. He says he's a good controller. I just trying to get to know him. And he told him my name. And anyway, we got really close, because I worked him a lot of times and I gave him great service everywhere he went. Mm-hmm. Went to Jacksonville a lot for some reason. There must have been dealings in the automobile industry over here then. Mm-hmm. Oh, Ford. Ford used to have a plant here. And so we got to know each other real well. And one night he came in real tired. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was working the mid shift. And damn, I can't think of his name. Anyway, I could say his name when he came over, mm-hmm. and he'd say, "S.A.?" I said, "Yeah, S.A., that's you." And I can't think of his name. Yeah, of course.
S.A. for Sandusky?
And well, that was our operating initials. All controllers have operating initials.
Right.
You don't ever use your name on
right.
the tapes. It's always operating initials.
Sure.
And so he came on. He sounded a little tired. He was at 15,000 feet coming out of Atlanta. No, Augusta. He was coming out of Augusta, Georgia, because came right across Albany. Thomasville is right on down here. He usually started his descent at Albany. I'd clear him straight in, and he came, checked in at the Atlanta boundary north of Albany, and I greeted him and acknowledged him, and there wasn't any comment. All of a sudden, his plane just went straight on across, went right on by Tallahassee. I kept calling him. I kept calling him, and no answer. And I said, "That sucker's gone to sleep with the autopilot on." And he went right on out in the ocean, and I'd already called Tyndall Air Force Base to alert an F-106 to try to wake him up, to scramble on him and shine their lights in the cockpit, and which is a procedure we were familiar with. Uh-huh. I'd never had to do it. And so I just called Air Defense Command when he got out over the coast, heading out straight into the Gulf, heading for Mexico. And he calls us. He says, "Carl," he said. He didn't even say it. He says, "Carl." He says, "I went to sleep." I said, "Boy, did you ever." and I called I says, "Hang on a minute. You're cleared back to Thomasville. Hang on a minute." And I called Air Defense Command, and I says, "Don't scramble." And they says, "Oh, we're okay. We're okay. They'll just do a practice." And they went in and scrambled the 106 for a practice and brought them back in. But he flew back, and he got on the ground and called me on the telephone on the long line. He said, "Man alive, I've never been so glad anybody was on in my life." About, I forgot, a month or two after that, he says, how'd you like to go to New York City on Thompson?